Hello, everybody. Welcome, and welcome to the AuthorTube Writing Conference First Page Critique Panel as part of the AuthorTube Writing Conference of 2022. This is a session designed to give honest feedback and critique of anonymously submitted works, which have already been randomly chosen and ordered for our panel members. My name is Shannon. I'm writing under the pen name of S.E. Huston. I'm one of the founders of the AWC, but I am just a moderator for today, along with my partner in the AWC.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jenna O'Malley, your sole writer, and I'm also going to be acting as a moderator along with Shannon. And what that means is we will be reading the anonymous works that were submitted to our panel members and for the audience listening. But it is our wonderful panelists who will be doing the critiques. The panel includes special guest speakers and guest speakers, some you've seen, some you've yet to see, and have experience in writing and publishing worlds combined, not just one or over the other. Let's go ahead and bring on the first of our panelists and allow them to introduce ourselves as our judges. We've got Rachel, Alyssa, and Margaret.
Hey, everyone.
I am recording. So welcome, Rachel, Alyssa, Margaret. Would you guys all please take a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing and or publishing backgrounds? I'm going to start with Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Lachmansingh, and I'm a published writer from Toronto, currently pursuing my BA in creative writing. I publish mostly short stories and poems in literary magazines, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Am I up next?
Oh, Alyssa, yes, please.
Oh, yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Alyssa Matesic. I am an independent developmental book editor with experience in the traditional publishing industry. I worked at 2 of the big 5 publishing houses in New York City, as well as a literary agency. So I also have a YouTube channel, and I talk a lot about how to write a better book, give insight into the traditional publishing process. So that's the background that I'm coming from today.
Great. And my name is Margaret Pinard. I am a historical fiction indie author with 5 books out available for purchase. Currently working on a short story collection and a novella to branch out in the form a little bit. It's 19th century British Empire, if anyone's interested in that. And writing and publishing path. I've been doing this for about 10 years. And have worked with beta readers and developmental editors and have started the YouTube channel and formed a lovely community. So I've been here for about 2 years, but lots of, I don't know, blowouts behind me to learn from. I'll say that.
Thank you all 3 so much for your great introductions and also for the critiques you'll give today and the insight you'll give throughout the conference elsewhere. Now, let's talk about the panel and a little bit more for it. Our panel members have received the anonymous works ahead of time, so they are naturally already prepared. However, Shannon and I will take turns reading the works out loud for everyone to hear.
And while each work is read, panel members will have the opportunity to raise their hand at the point that they would have stopped reading the work if they would have stopped reading. And for the audience participating in the chat, you can also feel free to raise your hand so that our anonymous authors can get a feel for what the consensus might be.
And at the end of each reading, panel members do have that chance to say why they stopped. It's really a note to give to help, or if they didn't necessarily stop, hey, here's what makes me want to read more. As a love note can also be given instead. Audience members, of course, you have the chat and the comments on the replay. For those of you there, feel free to plug them in as you wish as we read along.
Yes. And so just to clarify, the panel members will give either say why they stopped and or give a help note, and then also give a love note, which I think they probably understand that part from the packet that we sent out. And something that the love note is something that they really liked about the piece of writing. So we think this is important to work off of this help note, love note model to help writers the most that we can. And I think so. And again, audiences, please chime in with what you think worked really great for the piece too.
So we actually have had 2 handfuls and more of amazing submissions. We'd like to go ahead and transition over to them and get started. I believe, Shannon, you are reading first for us today, right?
I am. Alrighty. Let me get back. I was rereading them earlier. All right. Number 1, Seeds of Doubt. Jimmy held his breath, and feral cats slunk away, hair standing on end as if electrified, when the ominous old lady arrived on Nightmare Lane. She slid stealthily out of the tall moving van in the driveway of the vacant house. Her red hair, pulled away from her slightly misshapen head, matched the shiny paint on the front door. Her eyes continually darted from house to house as if looking for something only she could see. Uniformed men worked quickly to unload the van into the house, sweat running down their foreheads from the heat of the August sun. The movers were not hauling boxes stuffed with the usual things like books and plates and grandmother's silverware. Instead, they were carrying huge lights, fluffy beds, and plants. Lots of strange plants. Bags, open boxes, and pots of otherworldly plants. Even a sky blue tea kettle overflowing with extraordinary vines reaching over the sides as if trying to escape. Why would someone bring all those weird plants with them? 12-year-old Jimmy Carson asked his mom as they watched the action from across the street in their own brown, withered front yard. Jimmy was tall for his age, pale and freckled. His mahogany-colored hair was sticking up in cowlicked spikes from sweat, even though he was standing in the shade. Wouldn't she need clothes and stuff instead? She can buy useless plants at the nursery in town. And why does she look so weird? Mrs. Carson shrugged. She was tall, blonde and thin, wearing capri pants and a flowy shirt with geometric patterns on it. Well, they must be special to her. Those pink peonies do look lovely. I wonder how she will keep them alive in this climate.
Thank you, Shannon. And I actually saw Rachel and Margaret kind of duel almost around the same sentence. Didn't catch the exact word. I think it was the same phrase even, where they kind of raised their hands. Rachel, which word did you pick, and kind of where did you pick that and why?
Totally. So I had picked lane, so right after the first sentence. So something that I didn't note is beyond my experience in sort of publishing my own stories, I also read for 4 magazines and have experience as a slush reader. And so this was kind of like my opinion if I was coming at this, like reading this from a slush pile. So I think that there's something so interesting in terms of the images going on here, like with the feral cats slinking away with their hair going static. So I think that there are really great, compelling elements. But for me, the first sentence is a little bit wordy and may not have a super clear focus. While there are great images, they might be competing for space. And I think the intent here is to show that the woman moving in on Nightmare Lane is scary, or, maybe a bit of like a stranger to the neighborhood. But by the time a reader gets to the old lady, we've really been sort of distracted by Jimmy's reaction and the feral cats. So I might simplify that first sentence, just coming from a slush reader, the punchier, sort of the voicier, the first sentence, perhaps the stronger the hook. So those were sort of my thoughts on maybe why I would stop reading if I had gotten this submission.
You said you liked the images. Which one was your favorite, or if you have another love note to share?
My love note actually is toward the end of the first paragraph regarding the repetition of plants. So it's like instead they were carrying huge lights, fluffy beds, and plants, lots of strange plants. I thought that was such a compelling section of the piece because there's like a really great variation in sentence length. And I also come from a background in poetry, and rhythm and prose is one of my favorite things about writing. So there's also some really great phrases that use sentence structure interestingly, like bags, open boxes, and pots of otherworldly plants, which is sort of like a fragment there. So there's great musicality in that section because the length of the sentences vary. So I was really invested in the writer style at that point.
Awesome. And Margaret and or Alyssa, do you have anything to bounce off of it? Because I think yours was right around the same time.
This is later.
Yeah,
Okay,
mine was
okay.
latest.
We'll go with
Margaret
Alyssa
was
next.
at the beginning.
Okay.
For me, the section that I raised my hand at was when Jimmy is verbalizing, wouldn't she need clothes and stuff instead? She can buy useless plants at the nursery in town. And why does she look so weird? For me, this verbalization of, Jimmy's curiosity about the woman felt maybe a little bit heavy-handed, especially because The writer has already built a lot of suspense and intrigue about the woman in the earlier descriptions that this just felt maybe a bit too overt, and something a bit more subtle would have been a little more effective, in my opinion. That said, as was pointed out, I really do love the level of detail in the descriptions in the piece, both in terms of the characters' appearances and, the things like the plants. We really get a very good visual, we're able to visualize these elements really well.
Wonderful. And Margaret.
Yeah, and Rachel had a lot of great points about that piece that I had raised my hand at as well. So I'll just be very brief. And just my disclaimer, I am not a professional editor. So these are more as if I was going through a bookstore, paging through, seeing the first paragraph and going, if I flinch at any point, that's what I'm giving as like my ruthless first assessment. So there we go for the hour we're doing this. So I was raising my hand on the first line as well because of the focus. We have the boy's name, we have the feral cat, we have the ominous lady, and then we have she in the first sentence. And I was like, I don't know if we're talking about the cat or the lady, and why did we start with Jimmy if we're going to change? So I was confused, and that is going to make me flinch away. My love note for this, though, is the second paragraph, the first impression of Jimmy when we really do get to hear about him. He's an entertaining character. The humor between him and his mom is very compelling, and we have a normal established. So I think we started with the weird and spooky, but I sort of needed to be grounded before we introduced the otherworldliness and possible, strange elements in the story for me.
All right. Well, that concludes with our first reading. So we're going to move into the second, which Jenna is reading our second one.
So this one is called Cracks of Fear. The hired car peeled away from Nightmare Lane, leaving 12-year-old Ryan and his 2 suitcases on the curb of the large Gothic manor. This house was different from the others on the street, who looked like normal suburban cookie-cutter houses for the most part. The manor was stone with gargoyles and all of the creepy carvings. Ryan suppressed a shiver. The September air was still hot, but his coldness seemed to be oozing from the stonework of the large walls in front of him. It had to be at least 3 stories tall. Steeling himself, Ryan picked up his suitcases and walked the winding walk past wild, dark green hedges to the front door. There were columns on either side of the massive wooden doors. The doors had carvings depicting a man on a horse defeating a dragon. Weird, Ryan said to himself. He knocked, hearing the echo on the other side. No one answered. He tried again, but still no one came to the door. Shrugging, he tried the handle. The heavy door groaned open. The sight took his breath away. A hanging chandelier of candles lit the entry space with long, sinister, dancing shadows that seemed to move on their own. A wide marble staircase leading up to the second floor.
Okay, so at this point now, all of our panel members have raised their hand. So we're going to go ahead and stop the reading at this point, and then I'll allow them a chance to talk about why they would have stopped where they stopped at, and then also to share one love note. And we'll go ahead and start with Alyssa. And just to know, I think Alyssa and Rachel raised their hand right about the same time again. So a little bit of consensus there. So, all right, go ahead, Alyssa.
Yeah, so I raised my hand after the first paragraph. I know the audience doesn't know the paragraph breaks, but let me just read some of these lines. This house was different from the others on the street who looked like normal suburban cookie-cutter houses for the most part. This is where I started kind of raising my eyebrows just with the grammatical issue, using who to describe the houses. So I was a little bit jarred by that. And then the following lines, no, the manor was stone with gargoyles and all sorts of creepy carvings. This is where I raised my hand because I wish that the author was a little bit more specific in the descriptions rather than just saying gargoyles and all sorts of creepy carvings. I can get somewhat of a picture of what they're going for, but it feels quite general. And I would like, something a bit more specific to really immerse me in the scene. In terms of a love note, I think that this is a good setup for the opening of a story. We are immediately introduced to Ryan. We are immediately placed in this very intriguing location, and we are curious to learn more about the house and what's going to happen here at the manor. I just wish that the descriptions were a bit more unique and specific.
All right. And Margaret, I think you stopped just a little bit later than they did.
Yeah, it was a bit, excuse me, more cumulative. So I had some grammar things, some blocking things, and then by the time I got to walk the winding walk, I was like, no, okay, so it's cumulative. The language hiccups were the curb of the street, not the manor, but it said curb of the manor, which, not who, which Alyssa pointed out. The large walls in front of him, but there's a creepy walk. So if the wall's in front of him, where is he seeing the walk? And had to be at least 3 stories. A kid can see if something is 3 stories, that's easy to count. So that was just sort of taking me out of the viewpoint and the like setting up of the scene, and then repeating walk. And so I was just like, okay. The love note I have is that when we get down to the carved dragon banister, and the hint of things having sentience, it was very intriguing. That felt more unique, and like the setup was starting to develop into its own story, and I just liked that a lot.
All right, thank you. And Rachel.
Yeah, totally. To call back to what was said earlier, I particularly stopped at the line all sorts of creepy carvings for sort of really similar reasons. For me, the opening had great sort of potential because of the creepy atmosphere that is constructed, but that phrase left me wanting more than I could come up with in my own imagination. So maybe that's where the writer may want to spend some time expanding on the details to capture the reader's attention, since too many of the vague details can cause a reader to maybe work a little bit too hard and might turn them off from continuing. But in terms of my love note, I thought there was a really fantastic line. It was really sensory. And that is, quote, "The September air was still hot, but a coldness seemed to be oozing from the stonework of the large walls in front of him," unquote. Now, I really liked the word oozing there because it's sort of creepy in terms of the type of diction that was picked there, which makes the image quite memorable.
Wonderful, wonderful. And any other final notes before we move on to the next one? I see I'm having a small lag in chat, so
Okay.
I apologize. I was waiting also for that to even out. So if we want to go ahead, Shannon, you have the 3rd one, correct?
That's correct. So, once upon a sky. His life depended on one hand. Ramblings, shoutings, yelling, or simple conversations took place around. Yet he held onto his mother's hand, wandering between the ranges of seats and worrying he'd get lost if he ever let go of her. It was comforting to know she was there with him while everything seemed so tense and busy. Max looked at the plane, standing in the sun through the large window. "Ready to take off, kid?" He jumped at the sound of the voice beside him. His dad was tall and dark and wore dark glasses. The smile, though, was perfectly white, just like in the commercials. Max raised his little head to give his answer. "I like Rome. Can't we just stay longer?" Dad squatted to be at eye level with him since he wasn't as tall as him. Not yet, at least. "I know someone else would like that very much too. Wouldn't you, Mom?" She mumbled, not even looking at them. His dad's eyes darkened even more, and Max bit his lips. It was his fault, he thought. He had gotten lost at St. Peter's Basilica, and that had upset her. Dad tousled Max's hair as if he'd known he was anxious. Dad always did that to comfort him, but the 8-year-old could see through the facade. "Don't worry, kiddo. Your mom's just keeping an eye on the queue." They moved forward step by step for what seemed forever. The stewardess in reach, Mom showed all 3 passports.
And I think the last one came in right there before the last paragraph. So
Okay.
Awesome. Margaret, would you like to go first? I believe you were one of the last, right?
Yes. So I was trying to tell what was going on. The ending piece that made me raise my hand was the 8-year-old, because after the actions and the characterization of the point of view, well, not point of view character, but main character, let's say, had been conflicting for me. I was sort of ping-ponging between different ages with the little head and the tense and the sort of different judgments that we were getting. So when I heard 8-year-old, I was like, is it 8-year-old? Because I was getting different points. And so that's why I was a little confused by that. My love note to include is that the interaction with mom makes me think it's a kidnapping in progress, which would make the kid POV or the kid protagonist a very interesting twist for that type of story. So I was interested in that to continue.
Right. You normally get it from the parent point of view, it seems, with the panic. So, Rachel, anything to feed off from that?
Yeah, for me, I stopped sort of a bit earlier. I think within the first paragraph at the line, it was comforting to know she was there with him while everything seemed so tense and busy. And the reason I stopped there is because for me, I think the pacing slowed down a bit too much. And that's because by the sentence before that, which is, yet he held on to his mother's hand, wandering between the ranges of seats and worrying he'd get lost if he ever let go of her, we kind of have already established the main situation and conflict. So the writer also established that the child is looking for comfort through holding the mother's hand. So having this information repeated in the final sentence, in my opinion, may not be needed and slows the pacing down a little bit too much. So just that action of holding the child's hand indicates that the child feels comforted knowing that the mother is there with him. So that's personally where I may have stopped reading. But in terms of my love note, I really enjoyed the sort of detachment that the mom shows in her dialogue, where she just mumbles. She says, like, she mumbled, not even looking at them. I think the detachment from the father and the son was really compelling to me. It made me want to know more about her or her internal conflict. And from the father's reaction of his eyes darkening, that happens right before that, I wondered if there was something else going on, sort of that a reader will find out later in the story. I thought that was a great hook.
And Alyssa.
Yeah, for me, building off of what Margaret said, I was reading a bit longer because I was trying to make sense a bit of what was going on and what was the source of the tension between these family members. And where I would have stopped reading was when it said he had gotten lost at St. Peter's Basilica and that had upset her. And that's because at this point, I felt like I wanted a bit more information than I was given about what had happened to put us in this specific situation. While it was good that the author opened with this, conversation between the family members, at some point, I think we need a little bit more intel for us to get invested in the scene and invested in understanding what's at stake here. So that's what I was craving from this page. But that said, my love note, I think the author has done a really good job of portraying the childlike perspective of this character. And I think they really inhabit their point of view in an age-appropriate way.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So we're going to go ahead and move on to number 4 now, which is going to be read, right? We're on the right. Yeah, number 4 is going to be read by Jenna.
Sure will. We have to punch up our life game if we want to punch failure in the face. We have to punch failure to achieve. The speaker made jabbing motions with the fist not holding the wireless microphone. Joan noted how bad his boxing form was as she zoned out until the lunch. Pretending to take notes on her phone, she studied next week's cases. Paul stood up, clapping, so Joan did too. She smiled stiffly as they wandered out with the exuberant crowd to the complimentary lunch buffet. The motivational speaker walked through the crowd, acting like an annoying high school jock in midlife crisis. Bobbing and weaving in fake boxing moves, he laughed boisterously as talked in the tones of a used car salesman. She appraised him. She could drop him with one block and one strike. She was a black belt after all. The carnival atmosphere annoyed her, but the adults around him, sorry for the cat, were eating it up, including Paul. This food is going to kill someone, she thought as she gathered a meager meal from the unappetizing spread. The heavy stench of Cajun spices and something else turned her stomach worse than pans of undercooked omelets at breakfast. She wanted to gag, but she needed to appease her hunger. Sipping the off reddish orange alcoholic punch while nibbling on faux crab puffs from the seafood buffet, she gave up after when she tried to chew the crusty dryness. Spitting it in the napkin, she decided she'd rather starve. And I'm going to go ahead and step out a second and put her in the hall. I apologize.
Okay. We had two of our panel members who actually raised their hands, so we made it through to the end of what we were going to read on that submission. And so we are starting with Rachel with why would you have stopped where you did stop, and then follow up with a love note.
Totally. So I stopped sort of at the end of that first sentence, which was dialogue, and it's probably just personal preference. Totally. I'm just one reader. But for me, I find it a little bit difficult to invest in stories that start with dialogue as the first sentence. It's a little bit too much in the middle of the action for me to feel invested in what is being said. So that's the reason why I stopped at that point. But in terms of my love note, I think that there are some really interesting things going on with the food. In this opening, I particularly liked the lines, "This food is going to kill someone," she thought as she gathered a meager meal from the unappetizing spread. I thought that was a great hook, or sort of showcasing of the voice, like especially the phrase, "the food is going to kill someone," which is sort of hyperbole, and it's likely not literal, but that's what I think makes it so interesting to me, because I wanted to learn more about the character and why she's like come to this conclusion, which motivated me to continue reading.
Okay. All right. And Alyssa, you are the one who did not raise your hand. So what is one note that you could give that would help to make the work even stronger as your help note, and then your love note?
Yeah, so the reason I didn't raise my hand is because, as Rachel just pointed out, I actually was quite interested in the descriptions of the food, and I was a bit intrigued to figure out why Joan was feeling so, disgusted at it. It seems like something else is going on, with this event to put her in this headspace. And I was curious to learn more about what's going on with her and why she's acting in this way and making these comments. I would say that I agree with Rachel's comment too about the opening couple of lines. It takes a little bit for us to actually get immersed in this scene, I think. So I would potentially think about revising the opening lines to help set the scene a bit more before showing the dialogue between Joan and Paul.
All right. And Margaret, you also raised your hand a little bit later than Rachel did. So will you let us know why you stopped where you did, and one love note?
Well, I try not to let personal disinterestedness in boxing, dictate my desires here. Where I stopped was it laughed boisterously, because I have just very low tolerance for adverbs and dialogue tags, I guess. I think that this is repeated a couple times, not just the adverb and dialogue tags, but the overdoing of the same word. Like I got exuberant and then I got boisterously, and I already had that atmosphere. So I think it just needs to be like toned down a little. They have some very good word choices, like the cheap ass food and the hyperbole. There are some very punchy moments, but the adverbs just sort of are one of my pet peeves, I guess. And I would say the love note is the internal monologue is really funny. That's compelling. And by the end, I smell a plot brewing, which is good groundwork. So probably what I think Alyssa was saying, change up the beginning so that the groundwork has more room to shine and catch people, rather than have that confusing beginning.
Alrighty. And any final comments before Shannon reads the next one?
All right, so we're going to move into number 5, the Vociety. Looking down at the hole in my hand, I was still shocked to see muscle building and skin reattaching itself together. It had been 2 weeks since I woke up as a vampire, and the undead life had been exhilarating. I had this newfound strength, and every day Declan had been teaching me how to control and manage these powers. Declan said that I was adjusting to this life faster than he ever did, but I wasn't sure that I believed him. Each day we focused on one ability, like speed, strength, and healing. Today we were working on healing. Declan was showing me which areas of the body healed faster and which areas I should avoid injuring. I knew that I couldn't grow back a severed limb, but I could reattach a limb to the place where it was cut off. Declan didn't think I was ready to learn that yet, which was fine with me. While I was enjoying all these skills, it still made me queasy thinking about when I would need to use my healing abilities. Declan, have you ever had to reattach a limb? I asked curiously. I couldn't imagine when he would have had to do that, but I knew that life that vampire life was way different than human life. I haven't, but the others at the vault have. Declan responded as his green eyes stared down at my tan hand. My hand was almost completely healed. My eyes drifted to my watch, and I saw that less than a minute had passed since Declan drove a knife through my flesh.
Alrighty then. So for our next comment then, Alyssa.
Yeah, so I raised my hand toward the beginning of this passage, and that was because in the first 5 or 6 lines, I feel like we are getting a information overload. We're getting a lot of intel into this character and their experience of being a vampire almost all at once. It felt a bit overwhelming to me, and I really wish that the author maybe slowed down a bit in terms of pacing here to give us a more comprehensive understanding of the narrative circumstances, and then gradually, going into the dialogue and the ensuing scene with the other character. That said, I think they do a really great job of immersing the reader in the sensory experience that the character is undergoing. So I think overall, the descriptions are good, just maybe a bit of a slower pace to help immerse us in the scene more.
Perfect. And Margaret, I'm sorry if I missed yours earlier on. Okay. Because you scratched your face at one point, and I'm like, wait a minute, was that a hand signal or a face scratch? So
I'm glad this isn't an auction. No. I did not raise my hand because I went through to the end. I did have to read through it a couple times to understand because of the blocking, and I felt it did slow down towards the end. But what that made me feel was that I was expecting a reversal to come right after this passage. Something like I hadn't been focusing on the hand, but it had healed faster anyway. Maybe the rules didn't apply to me because we're checking in with the hand at the beginning and then again at the end. And so I'm looking for like a twist because it's sort of going off in one direction and slowing down. So yeah, I was interested to see that. And let's see. I'm wondering if that's what's going to come next. So I don't know if that qualifies as a help note, but my love note would be the first line grabbed my attention. The next paragraphs fill in minimal story. I'm ready for some why next. So to sort of help with the different take on the vampire story. Yeah.
Wonderful. So Rachel.
Yeah, I had really similar thoughts to Alyssa. I think we raised our hands at a similar time. And that's because for me, the line when we get Declan was showing me which areas of the body healed faster and which areas I should avoid injuring. At that point, it felt like the writer may have been stuck a little bit too long in narrative summary mode. So the first paragraph, sort of like Alyssa had said, is just a lot of exposition. It's a lot of information. I thought that was okay because it was interesting. But by the time I got to the second paragraph, which is where we start with the Declan was showing me which areas of the body healed faster, I was hoping to feel a little bit more immersed into the scene. I almost wanted to see Declan instructing the narrator versus having the narrator explain what Declan is doing. So this could be a case of maybe the writer using a little bit more showing versus telling. But in terms of my love note, I really liked the line, "It had been 2 weeks since I woke up as a vampire and the undead life had been exhilarating." I thought that was a really good hook and could even be the first sentence of the piece, because there's a lot of voice in the line and the exposition there in itself is interesting. I want to learn more about how this person turned into a vampire, for example, and why they like the undead life so much. So that was a really great hook.
Splendid.
Everyone's had a chance to go, right? That was number, I'm losing track.
I believe so.
Okay. All right, so we are on to number 6, which Jenna's going to read, The Thaw.
Yep. A bright morning sun gingerly peeked across the dawn horizon, gazing down upon the plains at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. The rays laid down upon the fragile earth below, still raw from the wounds it had seen so recently, rousing it from sleep. It was a quiet morning. They always were. If the city below could still breathe, it would take the first gasps of a new day. Instead, though, the city remained motionless, the life in the streets asphyxiated in a new brief hours one August day. Now skeletons filled the buildings. Undisturbed fog hung in the streets. Cracked asphalt roads that crisscrossed the land between buildings lay silent and dark. The sun finally broke through the clouds towards the eastern part of the city. Smoke rose from a few huts as the fires below started breakfast. In the shadow of the ghost city lay the frontier, where survivors clung onto a rough brand of life emerging after the war. Elon Sarkov made...
All right. So all the panel members have raised their hand, and let me make sure that we start with Margaret this time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually I think Rachel was the first to raise, and then Margaret, and then Alyssa. So, all right, Margaret, if you let us know at what point or why you would have stopped at the point you did, and give a love note.
Yeah, it was towards the beginning. The wounds, let's see. The rays laid down upon the fragile earth below, still raw from the wounds it had seen so recently, rousing it from sleep. That is giving me, again, confusing subject focus. So I wasn't sure what the wounds referred to, and I wasn't sure what was sleeping besides the landscape. So that's what made me stop. And my love note for this is that the instinct to have a quiet, slow curtain going up that we're getting with this landscape description is a nice one. I do appreciate that, like painting a picture to draw people in. I just need like more specific subject verb matching. Maybe the comma phrases is what's preventing that. And then what I really liked was the flashback of the main character. It's very everyday, very common experiences, but I felt it was effective to get us in the main character's head and starting on the story. So I like that.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. All right, Rachel, I think you were the first to raise your hand on this one.
Yeah, I would have stopped reading at the sun finally broke through the cloud towards the eastern part of the city. So the reason I raised my hand there is because while the previous details we've gotten are really, really great, that sort of, we get undisturbed fog hung in the streets, cracked asphalt roads that crisscrossed the land between buildings. For me, the details might have been a little bit too densely packed together, which may slow down the opening just a little bit, and may slow down that pacing and overwhelm sort of each image. They don't have as much space to breathe. And I felt a little bit overwhelmed at that point in the reading, because I had to keep track of several different details and images. So I like the details. I think they're really great. I think it's very well written, the descriptions. But I wonder if maybe peppering them throughout a paragraph rather than putting them all towards sort of like the end of that first paragraph could be helpful in still capturing a reader's attention with the gorgeous language, but not like overwhelming the image by putting on too many images at once. But in terms of my love note, I really liked sensory detail. I don't think we got to the point in the reading, but there is a really great sentence where the verb pricking was used, and I really liked that verb. I thought it was very precise, and it made me invested in the style.
Thank you, Rachel. And then we'll move on to Alyssa.
Yeah, for me, I would have stopped reading at the line, "In the shadow of the ghost city lay the frontier, where survivors clung onto a rough brand of life emerging after the war." And that's because this introduces kind of the backstory of this world, but doesn't quite give us enough details to fully understand what has happened here to the city. And while we don't need to know everything up front, of course, kind of as I said with one of the earlier pieces, we need to know enough to register the stakes and, care and get invested in the story. And I feel like I may have just gotten confused at this point because I was expecting more clarification than I was getting. And my love note actually goes to what comes after the point at which I would have stopped reading, which I think Margaret also referenced. I think the writer does a great job when they introduce the main character of this scene, because we're able to learn more about the city through this character's perspective. I just wish that we were a bit more grounded in the scene before getting there.
All right. Thank you, panel members.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I believe you're reading the next one, Shannon, number 7.
Number 7. Okay. This is Ivar, Blood and Steel. Ivar stood on the scorched dirt looking at the bodies lying about the field. Young men and old men alike cleaved apart and impaled. The 8 guards did not know what was coming. He had done what his masters have asked of him. His sword was crimson and his clothes were soaked with blood and sweat. The last man on the list was leaning against an old plaster-covered wall, moaning and grunting, holding his bloody left side. A black-shafted arrow lodged deep into his ribs between his fingers. The target's bodyguard was no match for Ivar's training and skill with a sword. The last nearly dead guard struggled to stand with trembling hands and weak body to face Ivar. The guard looked down at the sword at his feet. He bent over to pick it up. The guard struggled with the pain and fighting a man that just killed most of his friends. With a weak shaking hand, he stood as straight as he could. It was his weak attempt to stop Ivar. The guard lunged at Ivar, mostly stumbling over himself. Ivar swatted the sword away, then jammed his dowel into the chest of the guard. With a strong twist, Ivar jerked it out, pulling a piece of skin with it. The guard grunted, then fell to his knees. He stood over the body and mumbled, "Should have stayed down." Ivar turned around, looking at the wounded man near the wall. Ivar swung his sword at the ground to remove the extra blood.
All right, then. I'm sorry, Rachel, if I missed you early on there, my friend, did I?
No, I didn't raise my hand for this one.
All righty, perfect. So I know the other two did, and I was curious to see why not on your end. What made you want to keep reading, or any help you need to give?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I was really invested sort of in this. It starts very action packed, and I really enjoyed. Usually, like, I'm not somebody who likes to sort of be thrust into the action, but I like this one. I thought the pacing was quite interesting. Particularly, I had noted in terms of like a love note, a line, the "should have stayed down" dialogue. I thought that was very intense and sort of it gives a glimpse of the character to the reader. Really, I think what I looked at in terms of sort of like a help note here was perhaps the on the line level, like passive voice. I noted 2 examples in the first paragraph, like "were soaked with blood and sweat." The last man on the last list was leaning. So to clean that up, soaked with blood and sweat, and just leaned to make the prose a little bit crisper.
Wonderful, wonderful. So then, no other comments then from Rachel. Moving on to Alyssa, please.
Yeah, so I think I actually had the opposite reaction as to Rachel, which is interesting, I think, and just goes to show, the subjectivity of this type of exercise. The heavy focus on the action actually made me disengage. And I think that's because I was craving more insight into where we were, the setting, as well as the character's objectives. And I was kind of looking for that and not quite getting it. So even though the action, I think, was well composed, I wasn't particularly invested in it. That said, my love note, I think the author does a great job of establishing really high stakes right from the opening. So the opening line is, Ivar stood on the scorched dirt looking at the bodies lying about the field. I mean, immediately understanding that there's dead bodies around, that immediately heightens the emotional intensity of the scene. So I think that was a great opening.
Splendid. And then Margaret.
Yes. So, I don't know, action agnostic? I don't usually have it at the beginning of novels that I'm jumping into. So, my stopping place was grammar related. You see the dead bodies on the ground. The 8 guards did not know what was coming. This made me wonder if there were 8 more guards because they did not know what was coming, and if we were forecasting the future, or they had not known what was coming. So that's why I looked at the next sentence. He had done what his master have asked of him. And so I was like, I don't know if we're in the future or the past. And I don't want to keep going if they're not going to give me clear signals, because then I'm not going to get what's happening. But my love note was, number 7. I loved the tension and anticipation that was built with the fumbling with the coat. And I thought that was great. Also, good visceral detail with swordplay. If someone is an action person, like talking about the skin and coming out and wiping the blade on the grass or whatever, it would be great.
Wonderful. Thank you all so far for this. Thank you.
And now we're going to move on to number 8, Fate's Revenge, which Jenna is going to read for us.
The sound of running footsteps could be heard running through the emerald orchard as the billowing breeze of crisp apples. Their pace had slowed, passing several apple trees, jumping up to the air to pluck a plump red apple from its low branches. A bell chime laugh escaped their lips, brushing the long auburn curls from her olive skin. Taking a bite from the juicy apple, their eyes scanned the orchard, landing at the center of the orchard. A massive apple tree, taller than the others.
All right. All of our panel members have raised their hands, and we are number 8. So the first one that's going to talk is going to be Alyssa, which you were the last one to raise your hand about where you would stop. So if you please let us know why you would have stopped and one love note.
Yes, what got me was just a repetitive language issue. So it was the line, taking a bite from the juicy apple, their eyes scanned the orchard, landing at the center of the orchard. So the repeat of the orchard twice within the sentence doesn't quite work here and feels a bit clunky. So that's why I would have stopped reading. In terms of a love note, I do think that the setup here, the descriptions that we get of the uncanniness of this orchard are compelling and immerse us in the scene. And we get a sense that something may be amiss, even though it seems to be this, beautiful setting. So I do kind of like that, underlying ominousness.
Okay, great. Thank you for your love note and help note. And then we'll move on to Margaret.
Sorry, I had to come back to unmute. So I put my hand up at the first line because the second clause is a fragment and I didn't know what it was referring to. So it was, again, a question of confusion and not trusting the writer to lead me on in a clear way. Also, when they say when they say they, there, they're talking about the footsteps, I think, and then they switch to her. So the pronoun referring to things is also something to take note of and make sure that's clear going forward. And my love note was part we didn't get to, like a pet snake in a garden of the gods was a great line. So some of the figurative language was very entertaining and, sort of made me smile inside. So I like that.
Okay, thank you. And Rachel, you actually raised your hand first, even though Margaret was like probably seconds behind you.
Yeah, I had the exact same thoughts about the first sentence. As Margaret, I wasn't sure what the last section, as the billowing breeze of crisp apples, was supposed to mean. And I think that Alyssa had mentioned maybe the prose being a little bit cluttered. And that's sort of how I felt about that first sentence. It was a bit too detailed to the point where I found it a little bit hard to follow. And for that reason, I had a hard time investing initially into the project. But in terms of my love note, I think that this setting is really compelling. Like an orchard is a really specific place and it intrigues me. So I'd like to learn more about it. And so that's something that I particularly enjoyed.
All right. Thank you, panel members.
Alrighty then. So, Shannon, do you have the next one?
Yes. Number 9, middle grade. Summers can be hot and painful. A splint gets stuck in my palm from the fallen tree we are using as a stool. I haven't heard back from my friend. Not that he has hands to write me a letter, not that he has a voice. It is silly of me to believe that his ghost will come to visit. It has been a year since he sank into the darkness. My parents took me camping. Away from the city and its zest shadows are longer. It gives me false hope. Trip with my parents is always unpredictable. We took our neighbor kids with us for 3 days of camping and mosquito bites. I am listening to the trees and it is awfully quiet even with the other children.
And stop. I'll click mute harder next time. I'm sorry. So I believe we are picking up with Margaret for this one with the commentary. You were the middle child in this case, I believe, with the hand up.
Fun. So I did this right after False Hope and when he started Trip with my parents because of the grammar error. A point that could be made for all of these, like the grammar the verb subject agreement when you send it into someone and you're invested in their opinion. Just make sure that those T's are crossed and I's are dotted. But on a more content note, I'm surprised that we have false hope if the trips were always unpredictable. If they're always unpredictable, why was there hope at all? So it kind of didn't go together for me. My love note for this submission was the first paragraph has a great slow reveal and a poetic end about the ghost and the friend. And so that was a nice sort of gentle way to enter into the story, which I liked.
Splendid. And any further commentary before we go on to Rachel then? Perfect. Thank you. Rachel.
Yeah, I think I looked mostly at scene versus summary. So we took our neighbor kids with us for 3 days of camping and mosquito bites. So while I like the immediacy of the narrative right at the beginning, I think at that point in the opening, we got to a bit of like a slow point where the narrator continues to summarize the story versus immerse the reader into the story. So I thought that might have slowed down the pace a little bit too much to the point where the reader may not actually continue on. So that could also be a case of showing a little bit more, really delving into the scene rather than telling, so summarizing. In terms of my love note, though, early on, the line, I haven't heard back from my friend, not that he has hands to write me a letter, not that he has a voice, was super compelling and unexpected. And not that he has hands to write me a letter isn't something that I often am expecting to see when like the first thing somebody says to describe a friend, and that reveal that he's a ghost was even more enticing.
Thank you so much. And then if Rachel's commentary is done, we will move on to Alyssa.
Yeah, so I would have stopped reading at the line, "It has been a year since he sank into the darkness." And I have been seeing some people talking about this line in the comments. So again, people are interpreting it differently. But for me, this phrasing was not very compelling and felt a bit maybe melodramatic in a way, instead of just, well, first off, it's confusing because I'm not sure if I'm meant to interpret that this is simply describing his death, right? In which case I would have liked just a more straightforward statement, since he died. But then I'm also, led to wonder, is sank into the darkness in this world, does that mean something else? Like, is the darkness actually a place? And so that combination of confusion and just like being unsettled is what led me to stop reading. That said, Rachel's comments on the lines in the opening are aligned with what my love note was. I think the rhythm, too, of the mix of more staccato sentences and longer sentences with multiple clauses is really effective in the opening. So I think this writer has a good sense for the poetic, cadence of their language.
All right, awesome. Thank you to all of our panel members for your critique on that piece. And we have one left. We are on number 10, which Mask and Shadows, which I believe Jenna is reading for us.
All righty, let's go for our last one. A gray fog settled along the canals, blown in from the sea. The moon scattered its light across Venice, fragmenting across ebon shadows and the gentle lap of the water. A quiet calm swallowed by the night. A night perfect for killing. The stray thought made Cristiano de Ravenna, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Cristiano de Ravenna, the obsidian blade of Venice, smile, a man who, used to the darkness, he hunted night, standing on a wooden dock in the shadow of the Ponte de Rialto, as much a part of the night as the stars. In the distance, he heard the sultry laughter of prostitutes as they plead their trade, but here he waited alone for an answer to his call. The creatures he sought suffered from a capricious nature, but a curious one. They would not ignore his summons. A few moments later, a ripple in the dark waters proved him correct. From beneath the canal waters, a figure rose, and the head of a beautiful woman appeared above the surface, revealing a water elemental, an Undine. Cristiano felt his pulse quicken at the sight of her breathtaking beauty. She scowled. "What do you want, Ravenna? We're not servants at your beck and call. And yet you come, Cristiano smiled. I have a task for you, something you will enjoy. Undine's scowl lessened, and she swam closer to the dock. What sort of task? Have you and your clan seen the ship anchored outside the lagoon? La Donda. Yes, we are aware of the vessel, a large merchant galley, many crew, large, plump. Her split tongue flicked along her lips.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, we had two of our panel members raise their hand, and actually we're going in the order of them raising their hand. So Rachel, you were the first to raise your hand. So would you please tell us why you stopped, where you stopped at, and give us a love note?
Yeah, so I would have stopped reading at Cristiano felt his pulse quicken at the sight of her breathtaking beauty. And the reason I said that is because while we get some like sort of majesty in the opening, I'd stop reading here at this moment because of the generalized details. So right before that, we get, and the head of a beautiful woman appeared above the surface. So because we already got beautiful woman right before, we get another vaguer description, which is breathtaking beauty. Right after, which I found was a bit too much work for me as a reader to imagine on my own. So like the landscape is given lots of attention to detail right at the beginning, which is actually sort of my love note. I'd like to sort of see that more with the character descriptions as well, just a little bit more so I understand what breathtaking beauty means to this narrator. So right in terms of my love note, I did like the first paragraph. I thought it was slower paced, but worked really well because the details sort of have an ominous energy to them that made me feel there was some sort of deeper conflict looming that I wanted to find out about.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. And then we'll move on to Alyssa. You also raised your hand, although it was a little bit later in the point of the story.
Yes, so I raised my hand basically in the middle of the dialogue between Cristiano and the woman that he encounters. And that was because I felt like I, again, was just lacking context and I couldn't get invested in what they were talking about because I craved the narrator giving me a stronger sense of their relationship and, you know, what the dynamics between them are. Again, in the opening, you don't want to spoon feed the reader. You don't want to give them, you know, tons of exposition, but we do need, you know, at least a little bit typically to get invested. And I felt like I was just lacking some of that. And if in the rest of the excerpt, they kind of just continue on with the action, where I thought this was a moment where we kind of needed to step back a little bit from the action and get a little bit more intel into these characters' relationships for us to want to continue reading. In terms of my love note, I think the author does a really great job of painting almost the calm before the storm in the opening paragraph with their description of Venice, and then punctuating that with this line, "a night perfect for killing," which immediately gives us that sinister tone. So I thought that that was a very effective opening.
All right, thank you, Alyssa. And Margaret.
Yes, I really like this one. I didn't raise my hand because this is like catnip for me, right? You've got the mood, you've got the fantasy, you've got Venice. It's historical fantasy. So yeah, it was very cinematic. It had like a great mood to draw me in. And I was getting like Laini Taylor vibes for this. So I love the first paragraph. So my help note would be that the first paragraph does mix some metaphors from like light to shadow to the sound of the water, which could be sort of streamlined. And the calm swallowed by night doesn't exactly make sense to me, but I sort of brushed along the top of that description. And my love note was that I was very intrigued at the role of Cristiano and the why of this vendetta he has for this ship and the manipulation of the Undine, the woman being, and whether there will be consequences both to the action on the ship and to the calling of the Undine. So there's like the logic of this world that I'm getting more curious about, which is a great job of laying down just facts cinematically so that I'm drawn into the whole, you know, world that's being built for me.
Well, thank you very much, panel members, for critiquing everything. And, you know, I actually had mentioned it to everybody behind the scenes, but to our audience here as well, I would like to say I had timed everything. I read everything out loud and I went through all the sections and I thought we were not going to have enough time. And there's been a lot of people that said, I wish I could see the words. I wish I could see the writing. And I had it originally built into our script where we were going to show the writing on screen. But I thought we were going to run out of time with, switching back and forth between screens and everything. So I thought, okay, let me cut that out so we can cover as many pieces as possible, because I wanted to showcase as many people as we could. And I realized now we did have enough time. So I apologize.
First year is always a learning curve.
So next year we'll definitely show the pieces on screen, because I think that would be helpful, especially with so many of you guys mentioning that it would be better with the words shown.
Did we had some that could potentially be, a couple of them definitely could have been that avenue.
Yeah.
I think next year maybe splitting them into genre categories might help too.
Yeah, we discussed that, possibly putting genres as an option to put on there. So, but I think I think Margaret mentioned we're or maybe it was Jenna, I don't remember who, but we're fantasy heavy in this section of AuthorTube. So
it's just reflecting the statistics, so not unexpected.
Yeah, but we definitely enjoyed all the pieces, and I know I enjoyed reading them and getting a chance to read them, even though we were just moderators. And it's so great that our panel members signed on with us. Thank you so much to you guys coming on. And I guess we've got time built in, but I think if you guys are good, we'll go ahead and do our outro, so that way people can have another chance to relax before going into the next session.
I was just about to say, go ahead and finalize up. If you had any questions and we didn't get to them on this session specifically as well, and you're all quite welcome, go ahead and leave them in the comments, and we'll try to come back and double check them later for you.
Yeah, well, I will definitely come back and double check them. And if you leave any comments for any of the panel members, Margaret, Alyssa, or Rachel, I can make sure that they know that there's a question or whatever for them specifically.
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, then. And if that's all the time we have for our event right now, we actually magically have a tiny break before our next one starts, and the tracks are going to get ready to split soon. Okay? Keep that in mind. You haven't split yet today. We will be breaking into the 2 tracks soon. So if we want to go ahead and allow our wonderful panel members to do any outros.
And tell people where they can find more about you. And we'll start with Rachel, and we'll go through to Alyssa and then Margaret.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me on. This was so fun. And for everyone who submitted their work, I really enjoyed reading it. You can find me on my AuthorTube channel. I'm at Rachel Writes. I'm on Twitter as well. I'm at Rachel L Writes. And then on Instagram, I'm at Rachel X Writes. So a lot of my name and the word writes. But you can find it all on my YouTube channel, which is at Rachel Writes. Yeah.
Thank you. And then Alyssa.
Thank you so much. I want to shout out the submitters as well. It is very a difficult thing to do, even though it is anonymous, to hear critique of your own work. So I really appreciate all the participation, and it has really been a pleasure being part of the panel today. I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Alyssa Matesic. So definitely check that out. If you're working on a book, especially a novel, I have a lot of content about that, and a lot of content about traditional publishing, if you're interested in that as well. I'm also on TikTok and Twitter.
Nice.
Splendid. And of course, last but not least, Margaret.
Thanks, you guys. This was fantastic. I love listening to the other notes that people gave, because it's nice to revisit editing world. It's been a while since I've published a book, so it has been a while. But also reaffirm that everyone has subjective tastes, and your work is always going to be able to find an audience. So keep trying, everybody. My YouTube channel is Margaret Pinard as well. So Scally Dandle over there. I am a hybrid channel. I do AuthorTube content as well as BookTube content, hence the often being seen perusing books at a bookstore, very finely honed skill of reading the first paragraphs of a book. And historical fiction, let's see, it's Jane Austen July, so that's what's going on my channel. And I'm going to be at the happy hour and the Jitsi later today, as well as a talk tomorrow. So I look forward to seeing people in the chat throughout this weekend. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And she mentioned the Jitsi rooms. those are all linked on the website or in description boxes and chats throughout the day to track them too. So thank you so much for being here, everyone. Thank you for your submissions. It's been great. I'm Jenna O'Malley, your sole writer. And of course, the lady over here on the screen with me is going to be none other than
Shannon, and I'm writing under the pen name S.E. Huston. Of course, you're on my channel where I post content about writing and my self-publishing journey. And if you didn't catch it, Alyssa and Rachel both already had their presentations. Alyssa had hers yesterday, and Rachel just had hers just right before this. So they were both very great presentations. So please catch those. You can still see them if you haven't had a chance to see them. They're going to be available for a while. So thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us today. And we'll hope to see you around the rest of the conference. Bye.
Bye, everybody.